Hello and welcome to Lands Unknown. My name is Will, and today we are going to start going through the D climates on Zaalea, or the Trans-Metrine Zaalea. And yeah, I thought it would be a bit different to start with E and then go down to the tropics, where, in the last one we kind of started with C climates and made our way around. Hello, old growth forest. I saw that some other folks, not Dane Hart, couldn't be here today, but, shout out to them when they watch. Hello, Writer 2 as well. Folks filtering in. Yes, hello, Kate. And hello, Jan. All right, let's start cracking in. I hope everyone's having a good morning or day, depending on your time zone. I am now ready for the one time zone for the rest of my life. Oh, hey, Jake, how's it going? And just as we get started, I started watching some of the Curse Conlang circuses for number 4, and a lot of them aren't necessarily cursed. I think so far the one that I've watched that I feel is the most that is clearly cursed is the one with like the sleepwalkers or something like that. The thing with the phonology is that it is a negative phonology. So these creatures are making all of their sounds at once, and they have like 7 phonemes, and then one of the phone and instead of making a noise, indicating a sound, indicating a phoneme, they are not making one of those sounds. And it sounds like a gray noise machine. And I think that is, good for being cursed because it's particularly grotesque. So I did find at least one cursed conlang that does feel suitably cursed. All right. I did want to follow up on that. What's the one that gives me what I want? Hey, there we go. Just gotta move that stuff around. Okay. And for the D climates, I'm going to be using the 0 degree isotherm for the D climates, as I've been doing the whole time. I think 0 degrees is much more useful because of the substantial glaciation and how low the 0 degree isotherm goes. I think that's very useful. And I also plan to do that from the beginning because, if I wanted to use the -3 degree isotherm, I would have just made that an isotherm from the start instead of trying to guesstimate it. I think having the 0 line, clearly indicated, where are we going? Clearly indicated, oh, no, that's a painting brush. That is not a useful, this brush, studio pen is fine. Yeah. So, just having it here is particularly useful. It lets you, just kind of easily work that in. Though I may see how this looks, but having some sea creeping up along the coast here because the warm air does push up in the winter and the summer, I believe. Let me just check. Subpolar continental monsoon, yes. And we do have in the summer. Yeah, so in the summer, we do have this generation of low pressure by the Zaalean Cordillera there, both the Thuringian Plateau around Urukia, which is down here. Make it a little more. Whoop. Which is down here, as well notably as the Metrine Plateau up in the north. or the Metradian Plateau. What we got? You're currently reading anything you can find about Proto-Dravidian in the earliest stages of populating Southeast Asia, which is the plan. It's pain to find, but it's fun. Quite useful hyperfixation. Yeah, there's a whole book I remember about migrations. I mean, I think it covers the Bantu migration and the Polynesian migration. It may discuss. Yeah, Proto-Dravidian. I'm not sure. Well, I mean, there are some hypotheses that they migrated south from, I guess, closer into like Central Asia, I suppose. And then part of that hypothesis is also that a group of them migrated west, and they may represent Elamite, maybe? Yeah, so there are some studies that do discuss that. I can send you some stuff later over Discord. All right. I don't know why. Oh, I see. I don't want my mouse going over it while I'm... There we go. Yeah, so we do have this monsoon. And what's nice about the monsoon is, you know, we do have warm water in the summer to, you know, so there's a decent amount of evaporation, which will bring a lot of precipitation in. However, the monsoon is not as strong as it could be, and that's largely because of how cool it is. And, you know, as the planet cools over time, you know, the monsoon will get a bit weaker. But it is, you know, still pretty powerful. The other thing that's going on is we also have wind shear, where, you know, because we have a sharp difference between how warm it is in here and how cool it is up here, we do have fast winds moving from the lower latitudes to the higher latitudes, and that is definitely helping this out. Though a lot of that wind movement is also happening, you know, higher up in the atmosphere. So I am going to work on getting the 0 degree isotherm in January. Last time we were mostly looking at the July temperatures because we were doing the E-climates, but this time we're going to be spending a decent amount of time looking at the January temperatures here. And I can go to, yeah, I can bring up my map underneath. And I'll probably start, that's the FB. Yeah, okay, let's do this then. Oop, easy enough. Do I want to start with C? Yeah, I'll start with the DWC at the bottom here, just because just the way that I organize the layers, I think that'd be useful. And just put everything else on top, so I can cut it out if I don't need it. The Dravidian link with the Indus and the Elamites aren't convincing to me at all. I used to be more open to every link, but I think the paramundic hypothesis seems a lot more credible. Yeah. Now, there's another paper that came out recently that was linking the Indus to the Elamites. When that come out? Like a year or two ago? That's just why it's just top of mind. But speaking of things that happened over the last week, what is it? I saw World Anvil released a YouTube video that talked about something that they called the porcelain hypothesis or the porcelain argument. And I thought it was interesting enough to sort of talk about because I think it is something that, shows up pretty frequently. Like it's a common thing that shows up in like world building and stuff like that. I'm also going to turn on elevation and decrease the opacity with that as well. So let me get my bearings here. Okay, there we go. The Nadene-Yanisian hypothesis is cool. Oh yeah, the one that connects the people along the river in Siberia with folks in North America. Yeah, definitely cool. I mean, it's difficult to, if not impossible, to prove, but it is certainly interesting. I get the shape of it here. And then I will, oh no, did I do what I think I just did? Yes, I did. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Always make sure to check your layers. I was not checking my layers. I was punished for my hubris. There we go. All right, so we got that in there. Oh no. Oh yeah, because it's on top of the E climates. Well, that's not going to do. Let's these up here. There we go. That's a lot better. All right, yeah. So this world anvil video was talking about something that they called the porcelain hypothesis. Now, I did my due diligence and looked up what the porcelain hypothesis was when they started talking about it, because I had not heard of it before, even though I was fairly sure where it came from. And I was right that I did know more or less where it came from, but I also, yeah, so we may, because then gets to 0 there, because yeah, it's gonna be something that's gonna be limited. So I may check to see what happens there. I may have to expand the ET climates. Yeah, I see, because that's part of the background. I'll clean that up later. I'll just do a delete after that. I was fairly certain where it came from, but I wanted to know if I could find the specific, like, the specific paper it was from to see the argument that was being made. And I could not find the paper where the argument was being made, even though there was one in a citation, but, it was not, I should have put this on a different layer than the black, but so it goes. Yeah, I should have checked where it came. I did try to check where it came from. It was just, couldn't really find it, which is fine. No, not what I want. Yeah, I want there. This what I want to erase? Yeah, this is what I want to erase. Good. But I don't really want to use that brush to erase. Again, I was using a painting brush. So this is why I usually don't talk about stuff while I'm also doing things at the same time. I find it difficult. I'm sure everyone is in tense anticipation. All right, so this porcelain hypothesis thing. So I was pretty sure where it came from, and I did look it up. For those who don't know about the Needham question, so Needham was a sinologist. So he studied East Asia, particularly like, Chinese dynasties that are now in what is China. And particularly, he was looking at the Ming and the Qing, and he was looking at the history of science and technology. And Needham's question was, you had this pretty wealthy, capable. Yeah, I'll have to go in and do it again. You have this pretty wealthy and capable, empire, civilization, and they did not develop the same scientific advances that, Europe did. Europe, the European subcontinent being comparatively poorer, having less resources, not particularly having a good time of it. And so the Needham question is like, why did this happen? Like, why was the, East Asia and the Chinese dynasties, the Ming and the Qing in particular, not developing the same kinds of advances in science and technology. And this was, particularly notable as well because China is also a place where a lot of very important inventions were spread to Europe, for example, right? Like this is where gunpowder and things come from. And so, you'd think that a place that had so much scientific advancement and technological advancement would also be a place where, you could continue to see those kinds of advancements, but we don't. The Needham question also arguably gave rise to a more broader question that's taken up in history and geography and political science and economics. And the Great Divergence asks, why the European subcontinent was able to become a, politically dominant force in the world, beginning largely in the 18th century. And, because as I mentioned with like the Ming and the Qing, very large polities, had a lot of wealth and things like that. But they weren't the only ones. I mean, you had the Islamicate gunpowder empires like the Safavids, the Ottomans, and the Mughals. Also, very large politically, large polities with very powerful militaries and economies. They were interconnected, did a lot of trade. And, the Ottomans were quite a important political player in Europe as well. So then the question is, why was the European subcontinent, these smaller polities, which by that point were like early states, why were these early states, these smaller polities, able to so handedly and that's kind of the reveal, is that it was not so handily. It was not inevitable or anything at all. But why were these small polities in the European subcontinent able to become such influential on a global stage? And I'll pick that back up in a sec. But right now, I've got so now what I'm doing, because I already got my line for the declimates in, and I'm going to be changing this, of course. But now we need to do the separation between the B and the, I'm going to do separation between, no, I'm going to start with the F climates here. So I'm going to go to DWA. And the DWA climates are going to be anywhere where the summer temperature is above 22 degrees. Let's go back to our July temperatures here. And we've got, just for sake of argument here, let's pick a different one here. So here we've got 24 degrees Celsius. And then here we've got 18 degrees Celsius. So at some point in this, we are going to have 22 degrees Celsius. And we're going to have an interesting shape for these climates because of the elevation, right? So because of this elevation situation, and again, you know, this is more or less, this is around 0 meters right at the coast. And then this is 250. So it's not too much of a significant difference. And we can look at, so this is kind of where our 22 line is going to be at sea level. So we're going to modify based on height where the 22 degree line for the A climates is going to be. All right, so I'm going to get rid of that. Did I put it on elevation? I did put it on elevation. Great. So we're going to flip that back on. Yeah, we're going to keep that. And we are going to go to our DWA here and then grab that nice pale lavender. Well, I guess lavender's already pale. Got it. Wonderful. Okay. So if it is 22 at 0, then that will already be too cool. Oh, anyone hear the sirens in the background? All right, so if it's 22 degrees here, then if we're going to be doing 250, at that point, it would already be below 22 degrees Celsius. So can't have it there. So we're going to probably start having it just south of that there and, you know, kind of go along the inside here, inside of this very large valley, more or less, between these two mountain ranges. All right. Similar thing over here, though I am going to start it further down in here. I could make it up into there. And then, of course, the other thing you need to be thinking about too is that as it goes down here, it can also get wider, right? Because if at sea surface level it is 22 here, where is my June temperature there? So 22, and we say maybe it is 23 about here. Then if we did our climate checks, depending on elevation, kind of following this along here like we did with the other one. And I want it to rise over land because it does heat up. It does heat up in the summer. Yeah, I could probably push it a bit. So when would that sort of 1 degree of change happen, or just over 1 degree of change happen? That would make it drop down. And I do think it would be this 250 line. So I'm going to move it closer to the 250 line as we get it over here. Where was I drawing that? Oh, you gotta be kidding me. All right. Okay. Yeah, it may just be easier to just go back. Can't believe I did it again. All right, how far back do I have to go? All right. Okay, let's go back here. Turn that on, go to DWA, and then grab what I want. Cool. Again, it's already 250, so we're going to start down here. Okay, that looks right. Cool. And then by here, we're going to bring it down to there. All right, so with the Great Divergence, you know, why did the Great Divergence happen? How did all right, and then we have the issue here. I'll cut it up later. We'll see what happens. So yeah, the issue with the Great Divergence is how did this happen? And I guess whatever World Anvil is citing is discussing a reassessing of the Needham question, where they mention one of the hypotheses that was suggested. And this hypothesis was that because East Asia had developed porcelain for their vessels and didn't spend as much time in glass, because they developed porcelain, which was much better for them for doing vessels, for holding things like water and various other liquids and storing other, storing solids and things like that. They did not need, or I guess, want necessarily to develop glass, and they connected the development of glass in Europe to the development of various like scientific instruments like telescopes and things like that. And they attribute the development of those technologies to why they attribute the development of those technologies as to why Europe developed certain sciences, like astronomy and things like that through telescopes and things, rather than East Asia. I mean, this is kind of ignoring the idea that, there wasn't trade and that people did not trade these things, which is something that certainly happened. Is that you cool in the morning? But what's interesting about this is that World Anvil uses this formulation of the Needham question to propose to world builders this idea of contingency. And contingency is one of the 5 Contingency is one of the 5 or 6 C's of history. You may have heard of these before if you have taken a class on historical methods, or if you are in history, hopefully you have heard of these. But they include change over time. So the traditional, I'll go through the traditional 5 and then I'll talk about the last one. The first one is change over time, which, the idea is that this is sort of an elementary idea, but it's important for history, is that things change over time. The world now is not the same as it was before. And this is, quite important when we are talking about history, so that we, don't make very elementary mistakes and assuming things about people from the past, like anachronism and stuff. That is what anachronism is, transporting things or ideas to a different time period. So, you don't want to be anachronistic. We see that a lot in sort of fantasy world building things quite often. Okay, and how does that look compared to my old climate one? I had it going a lot deeper, but I think that's just the simplicity of the map, because I very clearly mapped it directly onto this line here. I very just clearly copied and, just sort of selected in here and then made it A, which is fine when you're working with a low resolution, and it's definitely quicker, but I don't think that was necessarily the best idea for doing this more regional, higher resolution one. But I do like how it expands a little bit out, so let's do that. Yeah, especially as it's approaching. As it's approaching the sea line down there, I can make it spread out a little. Yeah, it reminds me of Roman glass found in early Korean burials. Right, the East Asian world was not disconnected from what was going on in the Mediterranean. So, they were well aware of what other folks were doing. And also, so we're just going to go in. We're just going to go in and add a bit. I can make it more jagged and stuff later. I'm just trying to go for the general shape here. Okay. And then the next thing I need to do, and this will have to put a pause in this, the discussion of the C's in history for a sec, because we are now going to figure out the difference between the A's and the B's. No, sorry, the B's and the C's. And this requires taking a quick look at the this requires me taking a quick look at the continentality, as well as looking at the guide for manual temperature mapping to sort of see what I wrote for continentality and D climates. Subcontinental zone, 16 degrees. All right, and that's going to vary a bit over latitude. I think that was kind of a split, and I can make changes to that later if I want to. And it is below, so that's fine. I'm just going to grab a color I want. Because there's going to be more DW than there is going to be. And then I can also go through the process of double checking to see whether or not there'll be a desert there, you know. But I remember doing that prior, and certainly no deserts. All right, so I'm just going to go back here and look at my continentality thing. So where it matters, which is, I'll just go backwards, which is in this region. Which is in this region, it's subcontinental, right? So I'm going to be looking at that 16-degree mark. So anything that is 16 degrees or higher in July is going to be a B climate. Anything lower is going to be a C climate. Yes. All right. So that's why there's going to be a lot of B in this region, because that's where our 18 line is. So most of the stuff at sea level is going to be a B climate. The seas are more or less relegated in this area to more upland regions. But I want to keep in mind here that it doesn't matter. So this, oh yeah. This is 0. This is 15 degrees north. This is 30 degrees north. And, you know, here at, you know, about like 26 or so, 27, we've got D climates. And up here is 45 degrees north. So if we, I'm just going to remove that for a sec, and we can throw me up for a moment. Just making sure something in the, yeah, there's nothing to, I just want coping with latitude lines. I mean, I should just grab an equatorial map and have that projected. But, oh yeah, this one's decent. Yeah. Cool. All right, let's throw that back up here. Hey, little me. All right, so let's keep in mind, though, that like on a East Coast, like in East Asia here, at sea level, we see DA climates starting at, you know, what is that, around 37? And, you know, DB at sea level starting a bit higher, at around like 45 or so. We can see a similar thing over here with D climates starting at 40 degrees. So these D climates are starting 10 degrees further south than we would expect them on Dove, which is quite noticeable. So, you know, while yes, we don't have much DC climates at sea level, that's because any place where you could have low enough summer temperatures, you tend to have E climates already there. It just cools very rapidly. Right. Just give me one sec. All right, adding that back to stage. Cool. So 16 degrees. Right. Getting back to the 5 or 6 Cs. We got here. Oh. It's important to be aware that change over time also occurred in the past. The past wasn't static. Yep, 100%. And technology and culture are always improving. Well, I wouldn't say they're always improving. I'd say they're changing. So like things are constantly changing. Yeah, we may imagine the medieval period as being in a stasis, quote unquote, but you know, the middle millennium from like 500 to 1500, a lot of things changed over that period of time. Than one, you know, may think, or it may be suggested from watching media in the way that media presents, and the way media, you know, presents different cultures and those sorts of things. All right, so this is where I'm going to start doing those climate checks. So let's get rid of that. That wasn't a very useful layer in hindsight. Maybe. Yeah, it's different enough. And so 16 or lower. I think we are going to have, let's see here. $18. Okay. 15 is up there as sea surface. So yeah, it's just really crushed as it changes there because of the shift to continentality. And so if we go here and take this line sort of across, maybe. I want to check the climate checks on the other side too, just for convenience here. What do we got going on in the north? Yeah, so 15 is around there. Yeah, so then 18 is, yeah, so it's gonna kind of cut through. And what did I do last time? Yeah, so what I'm thinking is I'm going to start at the 18. I will do my climate check. 22, 21, 20. So it is 18 is, so yeah, so the 18 is kind of along the coast and kind of creeps in. Did I do that later? No, so along the coast and then go in. So there is going to be a quite rapid change where we care going through the 18s here. Okay, 21, 20, it's kind of tight. But it does make sense. So you are going to have some places where there's some pretty close together isotherms. So if we do here, just thinking about sea level. All right, let me go back to the global map just to check. Oop. All right, so on the global map, 12 to 18. Well, yeah, this is the thing. So 12 and 18 are here. So it just kind of rises over. So if you go halfway between, let me just, yeah. So if I'm going halfway between and then it goes up Yeah, it's going to have to be at elevation and in the interior. So I'm just going to work from the 18s and get to elevation from there and probably just move south from that as needed. Yeah, so starting from here. Maybe I'll make it a bit darker just to be able to read it a little bit. At 500, it'll be already down to 15. So I want it to be just less than 500. And if we're looking at our elevation here, all right, if we're looking at our elevation here, this, this is already 250. So we've got 250 in these spots. And so if we've got 250 at that spot, that is 500. So close to it, we are going to start to see that change from dB to DC. I'm going to go to DWB. I'm going to get rid of that elevation very quickly. Yes, I think it's gonna, no, because if it's 18 up here, yeah, but that doesn't. How did I do this? All right, so this is going to be more shallow in there, right? Because it's going to hit this elevation mark up there instead. So I'll probably just trace it out over the elevation map first, and then I will bring that over to my my other one. So let's make a new one here. All right, let's make a new one here. Let's pick a color that we're not going to be using, like peach. All right, so that's going to be 500. So we will have some sneaking up here. All right, and while I do that, I will talk about the other things I thought about talking about. So there we go. All right, so change over time is that things are changing over time, and there's going to be a lot of changes that are going to be happening, even within something that we would normally think of as a period, right? As Kate pointed out, during the medieval period, there was a decent amount of change over that millennia, right? It's 1,000 years. A lot of stuff's going on. In the late medieval period, gunpowder and stuff like that was introduced, which would have huge consequences. Though when most people are depicting the Middle Ages in fiction, they usually pick usually depict early modern knight armor, for example, but they do that in the absence of gunpowder weaponry, which was one of the drivers that created the need for that kind of armor. So yeah, there's going to be a change over time. And it's not just in, technologies, it's also in how people relate to the world. And, being someone who speaks English, thinking about England. Like England now, in 2026 at the time of recording, and England in, 1026. The language would have been different. So yes, culture would have been different, but also the lives that these people had would have been quite different, and the kind of values that they had would have also, if people want to talk about something like quote unquote family values or whatever, the values that they would have had would have been quite distinct when they're thinking about family, right? Because family as an economic unit for an agricultural society has much different ramifications than it does for, a kind of industrial, modern, or post-industrial society that England is today. The way that we engage with families, the way that laws changed over time and shaped family, like all of these things are quite distinct and different. So yeah, it's not just that, the technologies change, and this isn't, merely things like material technologies, but also organizational technologies, institutional technologies, all these things are changing. But it is also the ideologies and the worldviews that people have as those, other things change as well. And I'm going to carve along here, but I need to do another climate check. So we've got, let's just do it here. So this is going to be 23 at sea surface level. When is it going to drop to 16 degrees? Because if we do 1 kilometer, it is going to drop by what, 6.5? I mean, that's still what, 17 or so? 17. So it has to be over a kilometer. That yellow mark is a kilometer. So we're going to have the B climates going quite high in here. I mean, we're going to have a similar situation with the at 22 degrees. So we need this line that we're dealing with here to actually go pretty steep in its transition. And then we're just gonna kind of keep it down here. And if I get rid of that and look at that, yeah, so it's gonna hug the, we're gonna see a transition from DFB to ET in these lower regions. It's just gonna transition directly. Yeah, because how low would I? Well, no, that's not true. It won't transition directly. We will have a thin DFC. Okay, so that means I have to go in here. All right. Just how this works, I will have to just do it very thinly. Yeah, but things change over time. This is very elementary. The second C is causality. And again, this is something that we think of as very simple, but causality is that things change due to causes, right? There are reasons why things change, and these are structural reasons, and these are also the consequences of, millions of individual actions that are taken. So causality is that things are changed because they are caused to happen through the actions of like human structures, for example. All right, just want to double check that. At some point, this will, this will probably be CFB or something like that, but it's good to just go down all the way anyway. And after causality, right? I mean, causality is also pushing back against things, not just great man theory, but also ideas like that there is a like world spirit of history, like some sort of Hegelian metaphysic, right? Like it's not some metaphysical teleological force that is pushing things to happen, right? Things do not, just kind of happen because they're meant to. They are, caused by, a variety of material and understandable inputs that we can actually, study. So we've got causality, and we have, there we go. So we've got causality, and then we also have change over time. The next thing is context. Now, context is the situation for when a change happens, right? So so causality is when a change happens. There is context is when a change happens. There is a broader situation that's going on. There's a broader situation in play. And between change, causality, and context, we have the very beginnings of historical argumentation, right? So we say, thing, there was this change that happened in this period of history, right? So there's a change that happened. It happens within this context. So, it happened within this society, it happened within this religious context, it happened within, a specific cultural, political, economic context. And then the causal things. These are the reasons why it changed. So those three components make for the basis of a lot of historical argumentation, right? If people are writing historical articles, if people are working on, monographs and things like that is a very, very easy way to frame and to write a historical argument. All right, and then 18, what do I say for 18 over here? Yeah, the 500 meter mark. So it has to be just before this 500 meter. Yeah, so it's going to be sinking down in here. So with context and causality and change. So those are the first three. The second two are contingency and complexity. Now, complexity is the recognition that all of these things are incredibly complex, right? Like, it is not that, it is never very simple. There are always many different moving parts. And, the difference between, a kind of silly or like an asinine historical argument and more robust arguments are the details and the complexity that's taken into consideration. And then this final one that I'm going to mention right now is like the base 5 is contingency. And contingency is the understanding that some ideas happen. So if let's look at this real quick, is that things happen because other things happen. And this is where, I think the porcelain question is quite interesting as world building Anvil suggests it, because contingency is, so, is that occurrences, events and actions are premised on other things happening before them. And this is why I think there's a decent amount of like alt history world building that doesn't do particularly well. Because like if you're thinking of something like a real common one is like, what if the Nazis won World War II? That is trying to think of reasons why it happens, kind of fails to consider all of the contingent things that were happening that made the Axis lose in World War II inevitable. More, no, it wasn't inevitable, but there was enough contingent factors that were stacked up against them that made their victory implausible, right? From, starting multiple wars of choice, to be fighting on multiple different fronts, sapping their manpower and their resources and all these things. Like, there were choices that, the Axis made in World War II that caused them to lose. And so if you wanted to have a World War II where the Axis won for some reason, for an alt history, it would essentially have to be quite a different, quite a different war. Like, it couldn't have played out as it did. And it would have to be like, the significant differences are, very much not in the favor of the Axis as they existed in fighting that war. All right, let me just bring this up so I can get rid of what I don't need. Okay, so it goes all the way down. Oh, well, that's actually... Good thing I went all the way down to the bottom, because it gets pretty close. And that didn't go down far enough. So let me open that back up and keep doing that. Another one I've seen is stuff like, like why... Yes, overdetermined instead of inevitable. Yeah, it would be implausible. Yeah, not inevitable, but it was very much overdetermined. There were so many factors that were stacked against them, often by their own choice, because they were not very good at war, which, led to that defeat. But, another one would be, and something that's a bit more close to my realm of study. Is this a 22 mark? Yeah, it's a 22 mark. All right. Something closer to my realm of study is, like colonization. And, there are people who are like, oh, well, what if the Chinese dynasties, or what if the Ottomans went to, went to the Americas prior to Europeans? And while that is, maybe interesting on the surface of it, when you dig into those questions, they really didn't have many reasons to go, right? And the decisions of different European nations to make of those sorts of voyages, they could have been something as silly as Christopher Columbus, which was, he thought there was gold and silver there because of something that Marco Polo wrote in his travels. So, Marco Polo wrote that Japan had a lot of gold and silver and things. And so Columbus wanted to go there to find the gold and silver in Japan, which, Japan did not have. But, when we think of things like, what are some of the impacts that were there, things like spices and stuff like that, the Ottomans were already very wealthy. They were not looking for gold and silver. They controlled the spice trade across Eurasia, and they could always, throw ships in the Indian Ocean and have them go to the east. The Europeans, were not so geographically situated, so they wanted to find a way to go around. And in Columbus's case, he was able to convince folks to fund his journey because Europe was, these different European polities, which were becoming modernizing, quote unquote, modernizing into states at the time, were very, running out of money. They were in debt from fighting all these wars and things. And he was like, oh, hey, I can find you gold and silver and, have this profitable venture. And, they thought that was pretty convenient. So they were funding these expeditions. And of course, Spain and Portugal were engaging in colonialism by that point, whether Canaries or, on the coast of North or, sub-Saharan Africa, these kinds of things. So, that was already something that they were doing. That was a little bit in their wheelhouse. Yeah, got to keep going because I need to do this area as well. And it's going to be in a similar position. And so this one's going to be interesting because it's going to be approaching here and then going back. I think by this point on this side, it would certainly go get over here and then. All right. But yes, Europe was already doing early colonialism by that point, or early modern, like they're engaged in an early process of modern colonialism by that point. And they had, and they were moving to the west. So the idea of continuing to go west and try to fund a lot of their endeavors through. All right, what are we looking at? Through trying to find gold and silver in the fabled city of gold, which we got the name. Was it Cybele? Yeah. From Marco Polo, and his description of Japan. All right, let's just make sure that goes all the way to the end. So there's contingent factors. And if this isn't as articulate as I'd like, it's because I'm also doing this at the same time. And then the final factor, so after change over time, causality, context, contingency, and complexity, there is a sixth one that some theorists argue to add on, and I think it's a good one to consider. Oftentimes, it is clumped in with change, but many scholars, especially those who do feminist histories and stuff like that, think that it's important to highlight, and I would agree, and it is continuity. So just as we have to understand that things change over time, continuity is that there are a lot of structures that stay the same despite other changes that are going on. And one of these is patriarchy, for example. A lot of societies have continued to be patriarchal despite all of these other changes that have happened. So there are certain structures and certain worldviews that are quite sticky. And they are also contingent and causal. I mean, there are reasons why people continue to adhere to them and to propagate them. It's not that they're part of human nature or something like that. It's not, there's no metaphysical reason. They are structural reasons. They have a use for people, and why they are continuing to kind of propagate and spread these kinds of ideas. Oh, okay, well, if I look at my pink line, my peachy line here, it is quite similar to the other one that I drew. Yeah, I'm happy with that. That looks pretty good. Alrighty then. Let's go on to my DWB here and start to add that in. And so the interesting part of things like the Needham question and the Great Divergence, we can answer these questions as to why certain places didn't do a thing. These kind of counterfactual arguments. Oh, good Erictus. Hello. We can talk about some of these. These are counterfactual arguments, right? So we're saying, like, why didn't a thing happen? And the worst is that we can answer these questions in a very silly way, right? And Needham himself answered the question of why East Asia didn't develop the same science and technology as Europe in silly ways himself. For example, he said, like, oh, Buddhism, the religion of Buddhism is not, as willing to accept innovations because it's very conservative, as opposed to Christianity, I suppose, in that example, or I guess he would have also been comparing it to Islam. But we know that this is quite silly. There's also contemporary ideas that have been shared about Confucianism. This idea that Confucian administrators and scholars, did not want to adopt new technologies. And this is, a pretty common trope that we see in media as well. For example, like The Last Samurai, where Tom Cruise gets to become a samurai. I think he's actually based on a real figure who I believe was French. But this idea that the samurai had a rebellion and didn't want to use guns. The actual rebellion that it's based off of, the samurai were not rebelling because they wanted to use guns. They were rebelling because the state was being developed, and they took away all of the essentially they were deconstructing the aristocracy, and they told all of the aristocrats, and they're telling all the aristocrats essentially, like, get a job in the state, in the military, or in the secret police, or as an administrator or a governor, but you're not receiving your money from the state anymore to, I don't know, be aristocrats and do painting and things, because that's a lot of what they were doing by that point. They were just doing arts and stuff like that, and they were doing a lot of courtly intrigue and things. They hadn't been doing, warfare samurai stuff in quite some time. And the samurai did not like this. They liked being an aristocracy. They liked being elites. So the rebellion was more so about that. Guns do play a role in why the rebellion happened, and this is because the samurai thought that they should be the ones to have guns. They thought guns were very cool. That what they were opposed to was the idea of creating a military that was formed out of commoners and giving commoners all of this military technology so that they could contest the samurai. Of course, the point of the kind of military that the state was building at that time was to have a military where they could, arm commoners and have a larger standing armies, and have, a larger base of conscripts who could be more, effectively trained in contemporary forms of war at that time. And the samurai did not like that. They wanted to be the ones shooting the guns. They were not thrilled about, random commoners being the ones shooting the guns. They also didn't like that commoners could also become officers and things in the military as well. Even though many of the officers in the military were samurai, they were still aristocrats. That was still the model that they were following. So, the actual rebellion involved a lot of guns, though it did end with a sword charge down the side of a mountain after, they had been shelled and they ran out of ammunition. And Jake, people love to attribute these things, whole concepts as well, rather than specific people using specific ideas from these traditions in specific ways. Yeah, for sure. You don't quite see it as now often, but especially at the beginning of the media around the Rohingya crisis, people seem surprised Buddhist nationalism was violent, like many nationalisms. Yeah, so that is, we have these. The public has certain Orientalist, like romanticized ideas about, the a large part of Eurasia. So yeah, people didn't think that Buddhists, engaged in violence, but like there are a lot of Buddhists. There are a lot of Buddhist states. There have been a lot of Buddhist militaries. There have been Buddhist military elites and aristocrats who did violence, right? Yeah, it's just, just a thing. And so, and there's a similar thing that we see, was it? Yeah, did I mention? Yeah, so there's also been similar arguments with like Confucianism, right? Like Confucian scholars and administrators and things like that didn't want to adopt technology in the Qing and Ming dynasties, and that's why that happened. But that is also silly because, Confucian scholars were the ones who developed gunpowder warfare. They were the ones who were studying new ways of having fortifications and new ships and those sorts of things. Actually, I have a book. Can I see it from over here? No, I don't think I can see it quite well. I'll grab it during the break and I'll bring it over and I'll mention it for people who are interested in how the Qing engaged with the European militaries, because I do think it is an interesting question. But yeah, so these are these sorts of these sorts of answers where it's like, oh, the Confucians don't recognize complexity, right? Because there were different factions of Confucian scholars in the court, right? And, these different scholars wanted different things. There were also military aristocrats, and those military aristocrats wanted different things. Sure, there were some scholars who, had certain ideas about, what was the proper way to spend money and, what technologies should be invested in and those kinds of things. But they were not doing it based on, these Orientalist ideas of, the Confucians clinging to a tradition. These questions were often based on capacity, what the state could produce, what the empire could produce. They're also based on the problems they were facing at the time. And East Asia was, the Qing didn't really have any peer competitors at that point in time. They're spending a lot of their energy fighting rebellions. There were a lot of rebellions at that period, some pretty fun ones as well, like the Boxer Rebellion and those sorts of things. They were dealing with that kind of stuff. They weren't dealing with like engaging with pure state competition. The other thing that they were dealing with, of course, were like pirates, particularly pirates from Japan. Occasionally they had to deal with steppe nomads. They also had to deal with, because of the way that the empire was organized, each province was at periods essentially governed by like a local warlord. So sometimes those warlords got uppity and decided to do their own thing and form a statelet or something. So then, other warlords who were allied with the imperial core would go to war, right? So like this is the context that the Ming and the Qing were in. They were not fighting other peer competitors, peer states, because they didn't have any. So they were making decisions to build certain kinds of fortifications and invest in certain kinds of militaries that would deal with the problems they had. And yeah, and I mean, especially when, you know, the British and the Russians and, you know, the Portuguese are all showing up. You know, the Qing are, you know, having a lot of problems keeping their empire together. So, you know, we can look at the political, we can look at the very complex political situation and the fragmentation of power that they were dealing with, which is similar to what was going on with the Mughals and the Ottomans. And, you know, they were competing with other powers at the time. And, you know, some very small polities were able to take advantage of some of those internal conflicts for their own purposes. And a very good book on this is by, I think it's J.C. Sharan. I'll have to double check. But J.C. His book is called Empires of the Weak, and he makes a very compelling argument as to how some European powers went about the process of colonization from this kind of, you know, reassessed point where European powers were not militarily superior in many of the colonies that they were in and operating in. You know, they didn't have significant advantages yet. They were still able to effectively colonize some areas. Hey, there we go. Look at that. Now let's turn that off. Okay, so now we have got the DW climate down. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what's going on here. So yeah, in the summer, we have a combination of wind shear as well as the formation of low pressure zones. We have a pretty high, well, in latitude, we have one of our, let's do that. Okay, there we go. One of our, where was I drawing that? Oh no. You see, I thought I selected this layer. All right, so over here, oh, excuse me one sec. Hey, Racer. Welcome to the stream, where I try to do two things at once. All right, so we have a high pressure zone over here, which is pretty up there in the latitude, and that is helping to form this low pressure zone up here. That low pressure zone is also formed on the top of this plateau. And, you know, we've talked about how this happens. It's that the surface of, if you know, we have ground level, water, and then a mountain, and we've got Mr. Sun. Rah. Hail the sun. We've got Mr. Sun here, and Mr. Sun is heating things and causing air to rise. What happens is that the air on the side of the mountain, because the ground heats up faster than the air around it. So the ground heats up and it heats up faster, and this causes the air around it to swoop in to fill that space. At a certain point, though, you are going to get a high pressure zone on top of the mountain. And for us, that high pressure zone is going to be especially where our glacial area is. So we'd actually have a high pressure zone in here, and then we'd have a low pressure zone kind of surrounding it. So you've got high pressure moving down from the top. Let's pick a different color too. All right, so you got high pressure coming down from the top. You've got low pressure in the area where the air is rising. And then you've got high pressure coming in from the water. This process tends to be exaggerated by increased insulation. So this is how the African humid period forms. For those of you who know about the African humid period, humid period happens during during the cycles in which the Earth wobbles slightly. The Earth also changes which hemisphere is facing the sun at perihelion and aphelion. And so during the African humid period, the northern hemisphere is facing the sun when it is closest in its orbit, and that increases solar insolation by 7%. And that increase by 7%, and that increase by 7% allows for the ITCZ to move further north over the Sahara, which turns it from an arid place into a much wetter place. So during the glacial periods, the Sahara tended to be dry, and it also, may have been a bit drier precipitation-wise. However, and one of the reasons why that happens is because there was more glacial meltwater flowing into the Atlantic, so you also have cooler currents flowing along the coast of Northwest Africa. So, there'd be less evaporation as well, and you still had a high pressure system there. The high pressure system probably would have been pushed further south because of these changes in temperature as well. So you have a bunch of things working to maintain the Sahara as a desert. However, as we discussed before, it was also cooler, so there would have been less evaporation. So the Sahara was probably still quite arid, but there may have been more semi-arid areas and more shrublands and those sorts of things during that period of time. There's still more research being done. For example, Australia during much of the glacial periods seems to have been quite humid. It seems to have been moister than it was before. And that's because the temperature was cooler, and the southern hemisphere experienced the ice age in a very different way. So it tended to be more lush and tended to be cooler, tended to be more lush, tended to have wetter soils. So, different things happen in different places. In this case, we are on a... and how that information will impact Dove, talking about the African humid period, if we go to our maps of climate here. Boop. All right. If we go to our map of climate here, we can see that there is the Zaalean Desert. Oh my goodness. I thought I selected it. Oh, I didn't turn it on. We can see that there's the Zaalean Desert here. I'm thinking, and I do have it in earlier versions, I don't know why I changed my mind, that the high pressure system is going to move this further south. So I'll probably move it to be in here, maybe expand it a little bit, because we do have cooler currents coming down here, and there is, a decent amount of ice there. There aren't significant glaciers contributing off here, so I'm not going to make it as intense as the experience that the Sahara had during glaciation. But I'm still going to shift it a little bit. The Zaalean Desert is distinct because it is on the, it's more representative of an interior or an east coast, and we do have, and it does receive precipitation from the Aphrodite. Nope, that's not the Aphrodite. That's the Aphrodite. The Agathie. From the Agathie, and to some extent, the Tyche in here. So, so this is more or less going to stay the same. I mean, I may stretch it out into here. I don't know. But like, this is going to more or less stay the same. This one is probably going to be there's going to be a bit more of a difference with that one. But what it means for over here is that, we have slightly cooler temperatures. So the deserts that we do see are going to be in here. However, where we are going to have B climates is going to be in here. This is where the B climates are going to exist in here, because this is going to get very little, if any, precipitation. So these are going to become B climates, maybe transitioning to D climates. What did I have here before? Yeah, I kind of stopped the D climates in here, and I think the same thing is going to happen on this map too. I'm very sure. I spent a decent amount of time doing those checks, so I'll probably just follow that. I may, for the deserts, because I'm just kind of thinking about it. On this map, on this closer map, these areas here that we can see, so these like C areas are going to be less visible. I'm going to have more of the BK areas along here. It's not going to look as lush as it does. And yeah, and I'm not sure whether or not I want to have more desert in there as well. I think it's a very interesting, yeah, I do think it's quite interesting. I may introduce a desert in there too, because this is actually quite tall, this spur that comes off. Yeah, 2,000 to 3,000. So maybe if not here, I may make it go further down in there, because we do have winds coming in like that, don't we? Yeah, we do. We do. So, yeah, so I probably will extend the deserts down in there. But I do have plans for those deserts. Those deserts are quite, quite important for those plans. What do we got going on here? Are there any place that has the right condition to form hurricanes? Oh, sure. Yeah. Of course. Oh no, that's not the one I want. There we go. All right, so where are we gonna have hurricanes? Yeah, so I mean, we're gonna get hurricanes going up here, going down here, going down here, and up here. We're not gonna see as much in this area. I mean, we may see a few. But I mean, most of those storms will be over here. And then we can look at the winter, Northern Hemisphere winter, and it's a similar thing too, right? Like, gonna see them going down here, and down there. I mean, you probably see more in this area than you would in that area. But yeah, have a fun time with hurricanes. I mean, they would be pretty limited to within that kind of 3-degree mark. I do need to check to see how wind shear during a glacial would affect the formation of tropical storms, because the tropical storms may get more violent. I need to check that. Hey, how you doing? I'm doing pretty good, Somatic. How are you? One question about the African humid period. Would the more humid conditions apply evenly across the planet, or is the effect regional, specifically to the Sahara area? Well, the African humid period refers to regional climatic changes, though we can expect that we would see the ITCZ rise more in other parts of the northern hemisphere as well, and it wouldn't rise as much in the southern hemisphere. Oh wow, look at the time. We're already at an hour and a half. Time flies when I'm trying to do two things at once. All right, so I'm just gonna take a brief break. I'm just gonna step away for like a minute or so. And then I will come back and start working on adding in those F climates. Boom. All right, I love the sun and the dragon. Oh, pop me up. Okay. Well, yeah, that's fine because I was going to show some books. Okay, so I got the books that I was mentioning. So one of them was Empires of the Week, and that's J.C. Sharman, not Sharan, Sharman. So there's Empires of the Week. And so Sharman is taking the time to deconstruct certain answers to the Great Divergence. And let's just move this over a bit more. Sorry for the scraping noise. So he is discussing one of the common answers to the Great Divergence, which is also wrong, which is that the European subcontinent was able to become so politically dominant around the world because of their military. And they often point to what's known as the military revolution. And the military revolution is this theory about what was happening during the... I actually have the book. One sec. All right. Here we go. So, the military revolution, which, you know, is probably articulated most known by Jeffrey Parker. And he's like military revolution and why, then the rise of the West from 1500 to 1800. And then there have been long debates about this. One of them here is the military revolution debate, readings on military transformation in early modern Europe. And so the idea of the military revolution is during the early modern period, the constantly warring, polities in the late medieval and early modern period created a kind of military system in early modern Europe that was consisted of, the sun thing can stay up. That consisted of, a lot of drill, creating this sort of pike and shot warfare. There's also the incorporation of gunpowder, the sort of mass conscription of armies, creating these professional armies. No, mass conscription came a little later in the Napoleonic period, but creating larger armies than those militaries of the middle millennium, creating professional armies, gunpowder, cannons in particular, also fortifications, the kind of fortifications like star forts and things. And then a big one is ships, right? The kind of ships and ships with cannon became really important. However, the crux of this argument is that it was these developments that allowed colonization attempts to succeed. So, and one of those from Jared Diamond in Guns, Germs, and Steel, for example, very much positioning himself in the Great Divergence within the military revolution side of it. From Diamond's perspective, conquistadors like Pizarro and Cortez succeeded because of their military superiority. But this, doesn't align with the military revolution. So in the military revolution, it is the professional armies that were drilled and fought in this pike and shot form, which is why Europe was so successful. But if we look at how European militaries fought in North America, whether it's in Mexico or elsewhere, they did not fight that way. So Cortez was not fighting in pike and shot formation. He was, him and the other Spaniards were fighting more or less as men at arms, armored infantry. And they were not fighting alone. They were fighting with thousands of local allies. They created an alliance to topple the Triple Alliance. So to say that it was the the military capabilities of the military revolution that led to that is, incorrect. And also, it took centuries for the Spanish to actually secure control over most of what is today Mexico. Like, they didn't just, topple the Mexica, the Triple Alliance, and then suddenly they controlled Mexico. No, it was centuries of conflict and resistance. It was not inevitable. There were many times when the Spanish lost. And this is perhaps most notable in South America, where beginning in the late 1500s, the late 16th century, the Spanish, started colonizing on the west coast of South America, and they were expanding until the Mapuche decided to drive them back to the sea. They sieged a bunch of Spanish cities. I believe there's something called like the destruction of 7 cities. And they defeated the Spanish multiple times. And the Spanish did not improve their military. And the Mapuche were able to hold on and fight back against colonization for centuries. It was really only in the 19th century that Chile and Argentina were able to expand into Mapuche territory. And this is kind of the crux of Charman's argument as well, is that, a lot of the military revolution argument, it starts with Parker arguing that colonization in the early modern period was because of this military revolution. But what we see is that the consistent victories or, European settler militaries winning more often against indigenous and local forces begins to happen in about the mid-19th century. And oftentimes they are winning because they are adopting local tactics of local and indigenous forces. And a lot of the earlier victories we can often attribute to a lot of the earlier victories. We can also look at other reasons why they would have been victorious, such as, working with locals, when, people mention like British forces or French forces in Africa or in South Asia. If you look at who's actually fighting, you have maybe a handful of French and British officers, and then most of the combatants are locals. So, not Europeans. So to say that, the Europeans had a superior way of fighting is, quite silly. And in the case of the Pacific Northwest, you have indigenous groups regularly taking like American and British ships if they felt like it. There's quite famously Indigenous Alliance was able to seize a Russian fort on the West Coast and burn it to the ground. And indigenous forces in North America were regularly able to take forts when it suited them. And there, fair amount of American and British and French defeats leading up to the 19th century, again, is when we tend to see the change. And, at least on the West Coast, we can start to attribute those victories in the late 19th century to steamships, gunboats being able to move cannons much more effectively, especially inland. Flatter bottom boats with steam power able to move up rivers and things and into places where ships can't normally navigate to project power inwards and bring those cannons to bear. Gatling guns as well really changed warfare. But the biggest thing was probably the change in warfare that, made it more genocidal. I mean, I can talk about that the other time. But the one about China and about the Qing, Tonio Andrade's The Gunpowder Age, is a really good one that looks at China military innovation and the rise of the Western world history, and showing how, when the Ming and the Qing interacted with, the Russians or the Dutch or, whoever else, it was not a clear-cut situation. Now let's go over here. But the reason of rambling through all that is, for the world building anvil, what they, propose with this porcelain hypothesis, where, the reason that Chinese dynasties fell behind in science and technology was because they had porcelain, isn't a very compelling answer to the Needham question. But they are using it to make world builders think about the consequences of magic in their worlds. And so, if there's healing magic, what kinds of techniques and technologies wouldn't develop? Because we know about contingency, right? So certain developments are contingent on other things happening. If you can cast a spell that cleans water, you may not need to develop germ theory. And, a lot of discoveries in medicine are contingent on germ theory. So you may have, a very industrious magical society, but they don't know about viruses and things, because why would they? They don't need to know what a virus is to cure a disease. They can just cast cure disease. They do make some suggestions where it's like, oh, well, maybe like medicine wouldn't be a thing on a world with healing magic. I'm kind of doubtful. I mean, I think that, it would kind of depend. I think if magic was available to everybody, or magic was quite common, then, maybe we could think of reasons why people would not need it. But if magic is rare and, everyone who can cast magic can only cure a certain number of people a day, as the world building anvil folks suggest, you may end up, I want a bluier color. You may end up with a situation where, only elites have access to it. And if elites are the only ones with access, then, so if the elites are the only one with access, then they may not be investing much in medical technologies. But the thing is that common people would still be using, folk medicine, customary medicine traditions. They would still be, using various ointments and tinctures and stuff like that. Couldn't that entire peninsula on the eastern edge of the continent end up tropical? Oh yeah, sure. I think it will probably end up that way. Yeah. The thing is, when I was doing the low resolution one, if we look at this, a lot of it is more highly elevated, and I prioritized the higher elevation. So there'll probably be a tropical area in the lowlands in this darker green color. Similar to over here, right? Where we have up here a CFB region, and in the lowlands we have AF. So I think that it's quite reasonable that we'll have that going on here as well. But yeah, and as because things change, and over time, as maybe as aristocracies start losing power, if the aristocracies are the ones who are relying on magic users, people may still develop medicine and go on that path. Maybe there would be conflict between the magic users and um, maybe there'd be conflict between magic users and people who practice different sciences, and not because of something silly like the science v or technology v magic fights that we usually see, where like technology means magic won't work or whatever, but just because if magic users who can heal are being paid a lot of money or are situated among the elites, having people who can provide medicine and can cure people without them would challenge their position, which is a more is a more compelling way to examine the history of the world and to create social conflict. So by leveraging complexity and contingency and contexts and thinking of things as causal, for why things change over time, but also why there's continuity, why certain things stay the same, can help folks world build. And when we are answering things like the Needham question or looking at the Great Divergence, as I mentioned before, there are silly ways to answer the question, but there are also really interesting ways to answer the question. And the interesting ways help us look at that complexity, help us look at contingency and examine causes and contexts in more depth, which is why books like Empires of the Weak and the Gunpowder Age are so interesting and something that, world builders may want to look into. Even, Jared Diamond with Guns, Germs, and Steel is making an attempt to answer this question. He does it very poorly. And he doesn't really engage with the complexity or the contingency or with, scholars in relevant fields. But, he does attempt to answer that question. Oh, over time, you could have inversions of power with the nobility having obsolete technology because of their over-reliance on magic. Yeah, I mean, the thing is like, well, why develop gunpowder if you have someone who can throw a fireball? And the answer is, well, maybe you only have a handful of people who can throw fireballs, but you could make a bunch of mortars and bombard fortifications. And you may be able to do that much more cheaply than maintaining a magic user and training a magic user. And so, ends what we tend to see in the development of states in the early modern period is, and especially into the late modern period, are people who were traditionally not aristocrats gaining power, right? And those people may have a vested interest in harnessing the economy and production, especially if they're starting to industrialize, and bring those to bear. So you may have, and certain situations, especially like existential military conflicts, may prompt groups to make these kinds of innovations. And once, the cat's out of the bag, it's very difficult to put it back in. All right, so this blue line is the old line for precipitation in the summer. No, in the winter, sorry. So I'm just going to open up the winter here and see what's going on. All right, so we've got winds moving that way. And then because we got higher pressure, we could also see local things like and we talked about this before, but because there are mountains here, you have a mountain and wind is coming down this way, and you've got water here, and the wind coming down is making space for ocean water to come in. So that's one thing. You can also have sea breeze and land breeze bringing in water. So When the land is cooler, and the water is warmer, when the land is cooler and the water is warmer, you've got winds moving in. So plus degree C, minus degree C. Meanwhile, when the land is warmer and the water is cooler, you can kind of reverse this. So no. Oop. Yeah, so when the land is cooler, you have high pressure moving in and warm pressure moving out. And then here you have the reverse movement. And so you can have situations, especially like, in the morning and early afternoon, where, you have showers because the land is heating up and the ocean is cooler and it's not warming up as quickly. So then, you have precipitation on land. So we can have these microclimate things, and that is why I extended the precipitation up into here. I may do it into, let's see what the elevation is. Yeah, I may do it up into here. And we see similar things happening on Earth with like valleys are able to kind of bring precipitation up into them. So I may extend these F climates further north here. Yeah, that'll probably be better. But yeah, so that was the world anvil one, and I thought that was interesting. I think it's an interesting thing to pose to world builders. Though I do think like describing the 5 or 6 C's of history would also help, prompt thinking about it. Or else, they're encouraging, sometimes like simple answers to very complex questions. Like, yes, it is not porcelain that meaningfully caused. Like, it's not, porcelain did not meaningfully cause a difference in technology. All right, so we're going to have here, and let's. Yeah, that's why I did that. I could pull it in a bit more, I think. Yeah, I'm going to do that. I'm going to pull it in more. Okay, so. Yeah, I'm going to pull it in more. I'm going to make more of this monsoonal thing. I think that's a lot more fun. And then the other thing was Hank Green, the internet's Hank Green, posted a video about the warrior cats, which is not a part of my childhood. I know it's a thing because I have been a watcher of Tumblr for quite some time. But the warrior cats, as I understand it, is a young adult or children's fantasy series where the main characters are feral cats. And he was talking about their what was he talking about? He was talking about their theology and how he found their theology compelling. And they have this form of ancestor worship where if you are an honorable warrior cat, you get to become part of the Star Clan. So like the good ancestors are part of the Star Clan, and the Star Clan can influence the world in seemingly tangible ways, though he suggests that there are some cats who do not believe in Star Clan, which, is fun. So we're going to come out here because there's going to be precipitation, especially in the highland areas as the elevation kicks in. Aha. So let's bring it out here. Okay. And let's go back to the other one. And then there's also, if you're a bad ancestor, if you're a bad cat, warrior cased. Yes, the Kshatriya. Yeah, no, warrior cats. And so the bad case, and then if you are a bad cat, if you're not an honorable cat, then you go on to become, okay, so we are definitely going to be expanding it to here because of this, and there isn't much in the way over there. And if you're going in here as well, so, but this is where we start to see a bit of an issue because it is traveling quite far. So we may see, so we're going to see some hits as it hits here. Clearly, we're going to see some as it hits there. And then it's going to be picked up and taken like that. Sure. And we're going to have these two high pressure systems colliding here. So that's fine. Okay, so now, and then that starts moving into a more humid area. So I'm going to probably be fine with that. What's that look like with this? Yeah. I'm more happy with that, I guess. Yeah, that's fun. I do want more of that DW. I think that's kind of a selling point for Zaalea. It's got a lot of DW on it. So if you're a bad cat while you're alive and you don't act honorably, and apparently there's a law code and there's all this honor stuff for the warrior cats, you go to the bad cat place, which is called the Dark Forest. So you have good ancestors and bad ancestors, and the cats want to be good ancestors. This is very important to the warrior cats. So, whoop. So in the places that are dark, like here, I'm going to find the places that are inside this blue line, and I'm going to make them F. Yeah, the cats want to be good ancestors, and if you're a bad ancestor, then from the dark forest, they plot to interfere in the lives of the warrior cats. And they try to recruit other cats, I guess tempt them in things. And Hank finds this very compelling because, it creates a metaphysical scenario that, kind of explains suffering. And, there are good ancestors, but there are also bad ancestors. And yeah, Hank Green likes this. And I also find that sort of thing compelling, which is why it's something that I do in world building quite a bit. I often have ancestor worship and situations where there are good ancestors and bad ancestors. And I think in a one I did recently, the good ancestors, let's get rid of this orange distinction here for a sec. Yeah. That's a lot more helpful because I can't go under it. Right. I think, I have situations where the bad ancestors stay as ghosts and things, or they stay to their body and you put nails through them to keep them there, or, you drive them out, or you just destroy them and those sorts of things. Or if you cremate the body, if you're a good ancestor, you'll go to the good ancestor place. But if you are a bad ancestor, if you're a bad ancestor, then you get incinerated. Essentially, there's no good place for you to go. But yeah, Hank Green finds this compelling. But the reason why I brought it up is not because Hank Green finds it compelling. It is because Hank Green then says that he thinks that religion is a kind of technology, and he thinks that the one that he's surrounded by most frequently, which, would be Christianity, he sees as a technology for state control, and that it developed alongside more complex societies. And he says, if anybody knows about religion, that they should, correct him if he's wrong. And yes, Hank is most certainly wrong. Because we have examples of monotheistic religions prior to developing states. This is important. And then the other component of this is that there are states. He asserts that complex societies like state societies need a monotheistic religion in order to unite them, and he's seeing it as a kind of social technology to kind of create more complex and larger social groups, and therefore more larger polities, like, political groups that are organized under the same structures. But then, of course, the other issue with this is that there are a bunch of complex societies that also have ancestor worship, we've been talking about Chinese dynasties, and polytheistic societies, a bunch of different types of Buddhism have all sorts of different divinities in them. And I just thought that was I thought that was pretty wild, for someone to say such a thing. And again, this is similar to, it's very, someone dropped something upstairs. This is trying to answer that question, trying to answer, some certain questions that world builders often have. It's like, how does complexity form? Why do these things happen? And doing that, if I draw it, does it go over? It does go over. Ugh. Yeah, so I just thought that was pretty wild. Yeah, exactly, right? India has a variety of different religious systems. Some of them are, more monotheistic or polytheistic than others. There's a lot of ancestor worship, same thing, or veneration. Same thing with China, and other parts of Southeast Asia and East Asia, and oftentimes, the state religion and the rituals that the states engage in may seem more monotheistic, but what's important here is that they are, they are state religions. Not everybody adheres to them, especially, not everybody adheres to them. You can have a lot of religious diversity, and you have places where you have minority religions that are not the same monotheistic religion as the majority religion. And, this is definitely seeing a pattern in one place where, it was entirely contingent, right? The idea that you need a monotheistic religion in order to form states, it's just because he lives in a place where monotheism became the popular religion. When the Israelites, started practicing monotheism, they were not thinking, oh, we're going to have a big complex state. I mean, their state form was just as, kind of complex as the other people around them, which say not very much. I mean, even if you argue they had a state, kingdom for sure. But, whether or not, I would argue it wasn't necessarily a state. And this isn't a thing about legitimacy or whatever. It's just, was it a state? From a, descriptive level. So yeah, like it was just a very strange thing to hear. And, you know, like prior to, like in the medieval period, you had all of these Christian monotheistic groups, and they were not forming, uh, you know, complex polities just because they were Christian, right? Like they were, they were non-state, either stratified hierarchical or hierarchical polities, but they certainly were not states. And there were other things involved in kind of maintaining their in maintaining that. And meanwhile, the Romans were not the Romans were not so they didn't need for the longest time a single religious system, nor did they need nor did they need monotheism in order to create their complex polity. So it's stuff like that, which are very much like the guns, germs, and steels of it that create, these very simple ways of seeing complexity and change. And, he did say, he's like, this is just what he thinks. And he, told people to come at him. So, I guess in some way I'm coming at him, but yeah, I thought it was a very, very strange thing to put forward. Because it leaves, like it just shows that, there's so much about the world that, yeah. Anyway, I got a comment. Both the Greens seem to give big picture oversimplification theories. I may be wrong. I don't watch very much of their stuff. I mean, when he's talking about stuff that he knows about, he's talking about certain sciencey thing, like, physical sciences and those sorts of things, they tend to do a good job. But again, they are the sciences that they tend to engage in. And like, I guess I've watched some of their history series as well, and their geography series for Crash Course, and that does a pretty good job. But again, like, Hank was just kind of talking off the cuff based on reading Warrior Cats to his kid. So, I'm not, I don't think it's too, like, serious or whatever, but I do think, I do think it's worth talking about to a degree. And can I go over that? Oh no. Okay, cool. Nope. Definitely don't want to go up that high. And I know they didn't. Hank, John came out with a thing like everything's tuberculosis, and I think everything is tuberculosis certainly highlights how fundamental disease is in shaping human society. Like that's super important. When people write like military history, like military fiction and stuff, like fantasy fiction for militaries, like, this is going to be gross. But like how many times do they talk about, I don't know, like half of the soldiers in the military dying from dysentery? Like, it's not something that comes up very much. Don't worry. If I write fiction, I'm gonna bite the bullet. I'm gonna have the main character have diarrhea, because he goes on the military campaign. And that's very brave of me. But like people don't tend to talk about these things. But mortality, like sickness, has been something that is quite devastating throughout history and still is in many parts of the world. And let me just take away that blue line and see what I was doing around there. Yeah, I can go in and clean that up in a sec. Yeah, like sickness has shaped us in such uh yeah, in such a profound way, and things like tuberculosis have been very impactful in how we as humans have existed for quite some time. I mean, I do think, and I haven't read his book, but from what he talks about, like he does not say like tuberculosis is the main causal factor in certain things. It's just that tuberculosis has its hand in a lot of things that happened. I think we should, pay attention to complexity and stuff. Yes, it's like, things were not caused by tuberculosis. Why did I do that? I'll have to go back and fix that. Tuberculosis was not the main causal factor in a bunch of things, but it was the main causal factor in significant things, and we should remember that. World building really is both the best and the worst hobby imaginable when you're a perfectionist. The amount of fields of study I want to know more about is kind of daunting, but also exciting. Yeah, and I think like people need to, pick and choose and focus on what they want to focus on. Because you could definitely like get you could, what is it? What do the people call it? Like world builder's disease or whatever. By like focusing too heavily on certain things. What's this? This needs to be blue. Why is that not blue? Whoop. Oh, that was definitely too blue. Okay. You could like narrow in, but I mean, like the world building disease thing tends to only happen if you're specifically trying to do a certain project, right? Like at a certain point, you have to say like, this is good enough. So, if somebody's struggling to, if they want to write a book or they want to make a video game or something, then yeah, they can get stuck in doing the world building, and that can be mighty inconvenient. And I would recommend that they, focus on the thing that they are actually, kind of interested in doing. But if I put the DAC on top, what's that do? Yeah. Oops. Yeah, if you want to do a certain thing with your world building, you should focus on doing that thing. Yeah, I'm gonna just sort of. I'll figure out the other part of it later. So let's look at January again, and let's turn this down. Okay, and I want to see the elevation. All right, so that's 1,000. That is 1,000 meters at least. I don't think we'd see such a sharp change. The one thing, though, that I'm thinking of is that this is traveling quite far. Let's go on this layer. So this is traveling quite far to get here. Why is it hidden? I clicked it. Okay, good. It's getting quite far to go here. And same thing with that. So I may want to skinny it down more. That's less. So it may start coming out here. Yeah, so like here maybe. And then we got, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I'm going to do some erasing. All right, bye, Jake. Thanks for dropping by. But there, I think there are certain skill sets that are good for world building. You know, I think geography has a lot to lend itself because, you know, you can engage with both the physical and the human side of it. If you have, you know, at least a entry level physical geography, I think that would make doing a lot of this stuff way easier. Like taking like a first year geography course or like picking up a intro to geography textbook. And there's some free ones online. I can mention. Yeah, how about I do that before I end? I'll show you where a free one is online. There's a BC, the British Columbian government has a free one that you can easily access. Ah. Yeah, let me just check something right here again. All right, so I think something happened on the base here where it did not remember where I was drawing my lines here. All right, let's go back to this here. Okay, I didn't drop it low enough. Wonderful. Okay, there we go. That's why that kind of looked weird. But yeah, part of the project of this is also to kind of introduce more ideas and more like heuristics and rules of thumb to kind of consider. Is that along the blue line? We got our blue line. We got our blue line here. Yeah, it's along the blue line. And just don't want it to transition too sharply because that doesn't look that great. Oh no, I did it again. I didn't pick the right color because there is that on top. There we go. Wonderful. I think that's pretty good. I mean, we've been going for almost 2.5 hours. So, and I did fill in all of the D climates and I made some choices about where the precipitation is. So next time we could start working on the C climates. Just let me pull up my calendar here for a sec because I'm gonna chain because I do. So the 22nd I could do C, and the 29th I probably will not be doing a stream. Yeah, I'm not sure if I'll be doing a stream on Easter. I don't think I'm having Easter dinner on the Sunday, so I may be able to do it. Yeah, I may be able to do that. And I'm not sure about the 12th. So I'll let everyone know. But I'm just going to wrap things up in a sec. So I will be back in one moment to, you know, do a bit of a rundown. And then I'll also show everyone where that free intro geography textbook is. Okay, there we go. I am now back. Test, test. Okay, that's good. Test, test. All right. So I'm just going to bring up the physical geography textbook that is available. Okay, let's add that to stage. Here we go. So this is the, we've got some geography ones. So this one covers like physical, human, and regional geography. There are also and so this one is specifically for kind of British Columbia, and we've got a bunch of different topics in here. So it talks about physical geography, it talks about health geography, we've got food systems, resources, and this is much more of a regional look. There's also a physical one. There's a specific one for physical geography. Where is that here? Oh no, what's it doing? Okay. I forget how they organize it. Here we go. So this one for physical geography, second edition. Talks about the study of geography. It goes through geology and looking at minerals and things. Talks about volcanism and weathering. We got to plate tectonics and earthquakes. Talks about different and so if you want to look at plate tectonics and things, that starts around chapter 9 and goes until chapter 12. After that, talks about hydrology. So you've got streams and floods and groundwater. Glaciations, chapter 16. Talks about coastal geomorphology in chapter 17. Got oceans in 18. And then talking about climate and things later on. And then it kind of shifts into talking about Western Canada. So you don't then have that regional output. So, you know, in BC, you can use this textbook, talk about physical geography, and then you can use the other geography textbook, which includes physical aspects, but is also looking at human geography as well. Yeah, OpenText BC is a great resource because it has, you know, essentially like first year undergrad resources that are available. And, you know, if you're going in and here we go. Going into the climate change section, talks about paleoclimate and climate change. You can also open the context. The chapters are pretty easy to navigate as well. Talks about reasons why climate changes, talks specifically about anthropogenic climate change. So for people who are working on industrialism or something similar in their worlds and how that makes things change. There are definitely books that have better sections specifically on like climate and that explore like Köppen and stuff like that a bit better. But, you know, if you are interested in investigating rocks and minerals like plomitic, yes, then that would be really useful for you. especially things like weathering. I know that folks are really interested in, things like their shorelines or, how to do rivers and things like that. So shorelines and rivers and things. So this will give you a lot of ideas about how these different landforms work, how things like longshore transport and longshore drift work, talking about sediment budgets and those sorts of things, why we have beaches in some places and we don't have beaches in other places. Yeah, just kind of basic stuff for mapping physical geography. And where's the one on streams? Yeah, because at some point, I may map streams and things. But again, like I wouldn't necessarily do it on the level of map that I'm working on now. And just to that's I want to go to Google Earth. I did not want. All right, so because when you are working at the kind of level that we're working at here, you don't tend to see the actual rivers, right? When you're working at a scale that I'd be mapping at for Dove, like when do you actually start to see the rivers? You have to get a little bit closer. So you can chart the paths of rivers, of course, on regional maps. On local maps, they're going to be a lot more prominent, but you're not going to see that. You're not going to see the rivers themselves quite often. You're going to see their valleys for sure, but you're not going to see the meanders of a river when you're at this high of a level. You're going to have to get pretty close to actually see even a large river, to like see the meanders of the river. So if we go, I think, the Nile is a bit of an example, but even then you're seeing the vegetation and things along the Nile. You're not necessarily seeing the Nile itself, because this is where we start to see the meanders and things. You wouldn't draw individual meanders on our map of Lanao Takea, for example, because you're not seeing those meanders. You're seeing the course of the river at a much larger scale. Anyway, that's going to be it for today. Thank you for joining me in Lands Unknown and mapping Trans-Metrine Zaalea. Next week, we are going to continue doing the sea climates, and then we will probably move on to the B climates. We'll see if I have to take a week or two off in early April for streams. But I'll be back after that. And once we are done mapping Zaalea, I'm going to take a bit of a break from the climate stuff, and we're going to be having Bib on, and we're going to be working with the main terrestrial group of animals in Zaalea, which are not monotrematiforms or mammaliforms or anything like that. So that will be quite fun. And then after that, we'll probably do the climate mapping for Ilea in the summer, probably in the summer. We'll get back to doing some climate mapping. If you've enjoyed it, then like and subscribe if you haven't already, and also hype. People are hyping now. Apparently hyping is helpful because it raises things in the algorithm. You can drop a comment too. And if you haven't already, you can sign up for the Patreon or for the Ko-fi. You can sign up for free as a subscriber to either of those things. You'll get updates when streams are happening and when I'm doing other stuff that isn't necessarily on the channel. In April, I believe on April 22nd, I will be on Madeline's channel interviewing her about the world building in her book, After the Beast Came. Because the Beast Came. Oh my goodness. I read it 2 weeks ago and I've already forgotten the title. But yeah, that's coming out in early April. So I'll be doing an interview a couple weeks after it comes out. Just talking about the world building decisions and choices that she made in her debut novel. And I have some other things planned as well. There's also going to be an update coming out for Patreon for patrons next Friday about all the stuff that I've been getting up to for the next video. So that'll be cool. All the patrons get access to that. So yeah, thank you again for dropping by. Yes, and thank everyone for attending. It was a really fun time for me to ramble while also getting those declimates done. And yeah, as always, see everybody next week. Bye. I have to find the end stream button. They don't make it easy.